Catherine Carvalho, who is the executive editor-in-chief at Diario de Noticias. My pronunciation is terrible, and I apologize. Um, Katerina has also overseen the digital transformation of the organization to go entirely to digital, and they've got a subscription model, so she's very well versed to talk about this. Katerina, over to you, and I'm going to let you introduce your panel. Thank you so much.
Hello and good morning. I guess we are talking about one of the central issues of the business model right now, and I would like to call Stephen Damborg and Cosmin N. Paywalls are a business model, but they're really also another stage in our relationship to readers. And this relationship, it doesn't look like it's working. And we would like to ask, is it them or is it us? As the Reuters digital news report says very clearly, there is no sign that the majority of people are about to pay for online news. So this is the question that I want to ask. Even if we don't get all the answers, maybe we'll make the right questions for us to reflect and to think about it later. And maybe not as deep as Amy Webb as suggested, but some really important questions. It seems that the readers are exhausted. They are avoiding the news. They think we journalists are too negative. But also, they are very worried about all the misinformation and fake news. So maybe it's them, maybe it's us. So I'd like to introduce to you Stephen Damborg and Cosmin N. Stephen is a digital transformation specialist. He was the former director and CDO at the leading Danish publisher, Politiken Hut. Did I say it right? Because Danish is probably one of the most difficult languages, even for Portuguese. And he's currently focusing on digital transformation for global media organizations due to his work in the Scandinavian market as his consulting group, Digital Consult. Cosmin N is from Switzerland and is the founder and CEO of Later Pay, a monetization solution for digital content and service providers. Before, he was also the co-founder of Deluxe Television, which is a network of music television channels, and was a partner at Tech Venture Partners, a venture capital investor. So, is it them or is it us? Stephen is going to make a small presentation on this theme, and we'll get from that afterwards.
Thank you, Katarina, for your well-put introduction. And it's called JP Politiken, the Danish publishing group I worked for until 3 years ago. I'm going to give you a broad introduction to my take on digital subscriptions and the state we are at now. I'm asking this question is, do you really do the walk, do you walk the talk or do you just talk the talk? What we see when we look into the numbers, we see that a lot of publishers say that they are digital first and they do a digital transformation in a professional manner. But when we look at the data, we see a lot of publishers that might not be as digitized as they say they are. Take, for instance, this is an example from Norway. When you let a machine via AI curate the newsletters, you see a huge uplift in the click-through rates on their newsletters. But when you then ask the editors and the journalists around the globe, do you use your data? And everybody has the data in the newsroom today. Everybody uses Chartbeat or something else. But when we ask the journalists, are you using real-time data on a daily basis? Only 25% of the editors are using the data, and even less than 15% of the journalists are using the data they have at hand. Also, we see, this is an example from my home country, Denmark. We now know what kind of content that creates clicks, the unique visitors, that creates conversion to subscription, and that keeps subscribers engaged. And we see that the most engaging content are lifestyle. But When we look at the content being produced by publishers, we see that, that sports, this is the column to the right, the blue one, we can see that the companies, they mostly produce sports content, and to a lesser extent lifestyle, even though it is the lifestyle content that keeps your paying subscribers satisfied. So why don't you make the right mix of content that your audience would love and would be willing to pay for? This is an example from Scandinavia on how you can do it, how you can plan during the day and during the course of the week on what kind of content your end consumers want to consume, and then produce it accordingly. Also, we see that a lot of news publishers, they are not producing the content when their subscribers are consuming it. This is an example from the Washington Post. But it's not only the Washington Post. I think it goes for everyone. Look here. They have their main consumption of their content between 9 and 12 in the morning. But they produce the bulk of the content late evening. And this is, of course, because, you know, the journalists, they meet in the morning and they produce what they produce, and they're ready to launch in the afternoon. But why don't you flip it around and start preparing tomorrow's articles in the afternoon and finish it in the morning, so that you are in the marketplace with the best of your content when your consumers are there and they're willing to pay? And I think this goes for a lot of news publishers, that they tend to stick onto old work patterns and do not, the result is that they're not as customer driven as they claim to be. Also, do you really know the value of your individual user? Or are you still stuck with the ARPU, the average revenue per user? Because if you're stuck with that metric, you don't really know which of your visitors are paying your paychecks. This is an example from the Boston Globe. They say that only 90,000 heavy users, they bring in 86% of the total digital revenue. So maybe you shouldn't hunt the clicks on Facebook and other social media. Maybe you should focus on the 2 or the 5% of your audience that really loves your brand. And also, another example is from Axel Springer in Germany. They made the calculation, and they saw that it takes 16 free riders to add up to the revenue of one paying subscriber. So ask yourself the question, how many of your journalists are hunting clicks on your homepage and on social? And how many of your journalists are producing the content that adds value to your brand? Also, people talk a lot about being agile. And yes, we are perhaps more agile today than we used to be. But do you continuously work with your business model? Are you looking at the model, the frequency, and the incentives on a daily or a weekly basis? Are you truly agile when it comes to working with your product proposition? And also, we see a lot of publishers that are still putting a lot of ads on their homepage, even though we can see from the numbers that the paying subscribers are much more valuable to the companies than the free riders only consuming ads. So my question to you, do you have the right mix of ads and content on your website? How is your space management aligned with the digital strategy? And that brings me to my conclusion, is that yes, everybody nowadays have a digital strategy. We have the IT infrastructure. Most of us have a digital subscription product offering. but do we have the right mindset within our groups, within our publishing groups, to really do this full-hearted and using the instruments and the data and the insights that we all have access to today. Everybody can buy a paywall as a service, can buy data dashboards as a service. This is not the problem today. The problem is that we are still doing things the way we did years ago. So we really have to change our mindset and the culture and the habits we have within our groups in order to succeed with digital subscription. But then also, as Rasmus told us or showed us earlier today, we see a great tendency to be willing to pay in the most mature markets. But as also Rasmus said, the Norwegian and the Scandinavian publishers, they have been working on their subscription products for 15 years. Don't expect to succeed within 1, 2, or 3 years. It really takes 10 years from you start changing your digital strategy and focusing more on reader revenue till you will see these numbers. And my last remark is, remember that the market isn't there. You have to build your own market, because we have been giving editorial content away for free for many years. So this is a market that needs to be built, and the only ones that can build it is yourselves. Thank you.
Stephen, I was going, come. So for you, the answer to the question that I did, is it us or them in this relationship? That it's complicated, of course, we know. It's us. You're really stating it's us. We need to change. What is stopping? What is driving us not to change as fast as we should? From what you do in your everyday consultancy work?
Yeah, I think that everybody still has a substantial print business. So we may...
And is that bad?
No, I think it's good if you can use your print business to transform yourselves into the digital. But what we also see is that maybe the perception in many publishing companies is that we are not standing on a burning platform yet. We can still be profitable focusing on the print. But what I'm saying is that, yeah, maybe you can be profitable for the next 3 or 5 or 10 years. But at the end of the day, you will not survive without transforming your business models to digital.
Cosmin, go ahead.
Thank you. This is, by the way, a beautiful venue here. My little daughter loves to sing. So if I tell her that I was on stage at an opera house to do the presentation, she's definitely going to freak out. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how we think conversion funnels could be used by publishers to address various segments of the audience and turn those into paying customers. What we do at SlaterPay is we provide monetization models and solutions and very extensive analytics for publishers to understand paid content models and to employ them, from selling individual articles to time passes into subscriptions. And the reason why I'm here is that subscriptions start to increasingly pan out. And the big question is, what's going to happen next, and how can we engage with audiences and turn them more into paying customers? So we've seen this morning, and we've read it over the last couple of days, that people don't want to pay for news, and also that there is a subscription fatigue. And there's a third point that was mentioned in this, which is that people are going to move more and more towards music and video. And there's a reason for that, and it begs the question as to why is this the case? One of the reasons is that we live in a world in which people expect a tremendous amount of value for their money. So if you think of Disney, one of the most important and well-known brands on the planet, with the biggest single movie catalog on the planet, When they are going to go live this quarter, they think they cannot ask their audience for more than $6.99 a month. And that's what you are up against. That's a part of the competition, because on the user's end, the user doesn't see news consumption and media consumption separate. It's the same budget, it's the same money that you are spending. So it's not only Disney. Hulu is at $5.99 at the basic model. Other streaming services are also at about 7 or 8, I think $8.99 for Netflix in the United States. So you will, as publishers, you will need all the tools and all the gizmos that are out there to entice your audience, to connect with your audience, and to transform them into paying customers. So you need all those tools. And that brings me, of course, straight to the Mango. Because the Mango, in my opinion, represents and embodies perfectly well how subscriptions and other models that are out there live together and belong together. If you look at how revenues over time get generated, you have subscription models that grow pretty quickly, but then they pan out. So once you have your loyal audience, what's then? How do you generate revenues outside of your loyal audience? And then you have low friction models like contributions, donations, single articles, time passes. All those models need much, much longer to start to ramp up. But once they start to ramp up, they generate an increasing stream of revenues, and they add a sustainable revenue stream to your model. And both belong together. I don't think that there's a right or wrong in this. There's a whole economy that lives between ads and subscriptions, and those low-friction models help unlock that economy. They make it very easy for users to make that very first step from being a reader to being a first-time paying customer. And they provide also very valuable data. Now, here's how we at LaterPay create those funnels. We believe strongly that it's all about offering choice and trusting your users to a certain extent. So having individual articles that you could buy, like buying individual articles, buying a week pass, buying a subscription for a month, or a full access for 1 year, these are all models that are appealing to a variety of people in your target group. So this is where you can make a big difference in how you address users. This is actually a real customer that allows us to put the numbers up there. PC Games Hardware magazine in Germany, they are using the funnel to segment users, and they generate incremental revenues with selling individual articles, and then some of those users become Time Pass users, and some of the users become subscribers. Across LaterPay, we see that 3.5% of all users who start buying individual articles end up subscribing. So there's no cannibalization, which is the biggest fear that we've seen and heard over the last couple of years. And we generate for this customer essentially 4 times faster revenues than they generate themselves. And it's not us, it's not LaterPay, it's the funnel, it's the way how we engage with users, or the publisher engages with users in a very simple and frictionless way. So if we think about this, we'll also think about how we can go outside subscription models. How can we extend our revenue models beyond subscription models to entice the audience, to connect with the audience, to turn them into first-time paying customers, and then into, let's say, upsell them into higher-priced time passes and subscription models. So coming back to our Mango, this is not an either-or situation. Subscription models and lower friction models belong together. They essentially are 2 sides of the same coin. And so I think that the industry needs the whole Mango as Mother Nature intended it, with all the different models in there. And at 4 p.m. this afternoon, we are going to serve mango sorbet up there. So just to keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Cosmin. We've been, both of you have said what we don't do right, what we are not doing right, and it reminds me a bit of what the the embracing digital times when people didn't do what they needed to do and what the market and the industry were asking. And I wanted to ask you, there's evidence that people will only subscribe to one thing, and if they are asked if they had to choose, what would they choose? And it's music and films and movies. And what is the lesson that we are not getting from the platforms like Netflix or Spotify? Can we avoid this winner-takes-all trap we seem to be in? Or, better said, why can't the industry collaborate in this?
So I think there are about like 3 different points in there. I'd like to just breeze through them. The first one is if people just go for one subscription and this stays a trend, in my opinion, this also highlights a very dangerous development, because it essentially means that for you to win, everyone else has to lose. So if I subscribe to your newspaper, I'm not paying any money to anyone else in this room.
And that's happening, right?
And this is frightening. And I think we would have to provide different ways for people to be able to donate or to contribute, to become members, or to do one-offs here and there, so that I can have a subscription with you, but donate to you, make a contribution with someone else, pay for content somewhere else. So I think we need to make sure that we understand that this could be a very dangerous trajectory.
We will get to that flexibility thing, but Stephen, I would like to ask you, why can't we cooperate? Why can't we get together and find a subscription model that works in a bundle, I would say?
You mean when you bundle between several news brands? Well, we looked very much into that in the Danish market, but we really discovered that people, they buy in on your DNA as a publisher. And it's not the same things people are looking for. So each publisher, each newspaper brand have their own DNA and their own audience. And we didn't really see, at least in the small markets, that also getting money out of the few that were willing to buy across different brands would add up for the money you lose as an individual publisher. So this is at least a problem in smaller markets. Also, I'd like to add to what you said earlier. It's correct that a lot of people only have 1 or 2 digital subscriptions today, but I've looked at research, for instance, Deloitte Digital, and they expect that the average consumer in Europe and the US in 2020 or 21 will have up to 4 digital subscriptions. So I think there's still room.
So it's an habit that's getting into people.
Yeah, I think it's a habit getting into people. And I think, yeah, people will choose Spotify or something like this. They will choose a Netflix and something like this. But there's room for a newspaper. And this was also how things worked before the digital age. Most people didn't subscribe to more than 1 newspaper. And they also went to the movies and had a cable subscription. So I think maybe we will turn back to the old days, where a majority, hopefully, of people will also have a digital news subscription.
Okay.
So in terms of collaboration, I think that there are at least 2 answers to that. The industry itself is going to have a very difficult time to create platforms that work across the industry, simply because the competition is so fierce, and essentially we're all friends here because it's people who are in this room. It's not publishing houses.
We have a saying, it is, in a house with no bread, everybody fights and no one is right. Which is kind of what's happening now.
So you would have to pick a technology company who is kind of unbiased and would be able to provide those services to the entire industry if you want to have, let's say, a flat rate for the entire industry. Because the minute when you have only publishers, there's always one who is going to be the primus inter pares and would dominate the rest of them. So that's probably not going to work.
We also talk a lot about flexibility in models, single pay and non-so engaged models as subscription for a year or something. Do you have any examples of what's being done and successfully done or not so successfully all over Europe, especially in the Nordic markets?
What we have seen in the Nordic countries is that the more flexible the model and the more free stuff you can see, the less the conversion. So what we see is actually a trend going from low-priced subscriptions of $6.99 or $9.99 to $19.99 a month in the Scandinavian markets. And you also see that you produce still more and more premium content. And the companies that also are using a combined model of freemium and meter, that they reduce the number of free articles you can read. But I think the flexible paywall is still very relevant, but it's more when you look at the people visiting your website. It shouldn't, maybe the number of free articles shouldn't be the same if people come from a social platform or if they come from your own newspaper subscriptions. So we know that people that are already subscribing to your newsletters, they are prone to buy. So maybe they should see less of free content in opposition to people coming from social platforms that may not know your brand. Maybe they should have access to discover, get familiar with your brand and your DNA before you put up the wall.
Also, I think there's a lot of, you see contribution models that really start to work out well. I think The Guardian is the poster child for that, like becoming profitable with contributions. And we see that contributions have one incredible power, which is if someone reads an article that touches them, that appeals to them, they click with, then people contribute, in our case, up to $150, 150 euros. Like, can you imagine someone reading an article and then saying, this was so awesome, I'm paying $150?
There's also something to think about that there, which is it just passion, or is it because it's a non-friction model?
I'm not quite sure about the friction, because you'd still have to go through registration and payments, but it's more that possibility to do something because you can, but you don't have to. Like, if we would have asked people to pay $150 to read that article, no one on this planet.
Do you think that's a model for others to copy, or?
Totally. I believe that contributions are the best risk-free model for publishers to try out, to connect to their audience, because essentially contributions are a button or a link or something that lives at the end of an article, and whether you click on it or not, it's not going to influence your website's performance. People are not going to go away. So this is a risk-free way to interact.
But Stefan, doesn't that require a great amount of engagement from the reader and the community that you are in?
Yes, and of course The Guardian, they have a lot of very engaged and loyal core audience. But you've also seen it work in the US, for instance, the Texas Tribune, they also have a contribution program. So it is seen out there and it can work. But when you look at The Guardian, what I see is that they are trying to, or at the moment, they're kind of switching their business model a little bit, because now they produce newsletters for contributors only. You can get podcasts that is only accessible for contributors. So it tends to look more and more like a normal subscription. And also, I would say, if the difference between the metered model, where you can just clear your browser for cookies and then you have free access again, the difference between what Guardian is doing and the New York Times is doing is not that big. And also, if you look at the way they promote the contributions, they promote it just as heavily as the New York Times promote
in every article.
In every article,
Actually,
you can't miss it.
You can't miss it.
So to me, it is, they say it's a contribution, but to me, it's almost like a paywall.
So two things to that. I think on the one end, Guardian says you can contribute and help us, so that they are more active, while a paywall essentially blocks you out and says, well, you've reached the end.
It's
so
a negative
now
thing.
it's a negative thing. The
Yeah.
other one is a positive thing. So we've seen a lot of surprises.
What we've seen in Diário de Notícias, we have a paywall. It's a freemium paywall, and it's not metered. It's that when you ask readers to be with you, and when you do good work, like we had a fake news investigation, people really flocked in, and not because they wanted to read, but because they wanted to be with us in that activism against misinformation.
So one last thing I like to add to this question, which is I think there will be new models that people are going to test in the near future. A couple of days ago at the so a couple of days ago at the Newsgeist event, the Google Newsgeist event, we talked about future models, and one of the people in the audience said, you know what, in Japan they have this gym where essentially if you go there every day you don't have to pay a penny. But only if you don't go there every day, you'll have to pay. And then the person said, why don't publishers try out that model where you could essentially say it's $15 per month, but if you come to my website every day, at least once, it's $5. So I think there will be, now that the cat is on the table, now that people see that subscriptions start to pan out, I think the openness to new models and more experimentation is bigger. So I guess we will see in the future models that we don't know.
This will be the last question after we open up the other questions for the audience. So I would like to ask you a very hands-on and management, from the management side, a question. This is not a marketing thing, it's also an editorial thing. Paywalls can't be only marketing our product, because that's not going to work, because what the readers read is what the editorial, the product is editorial. What are the most successful organization forms for this that you have found in your work, in your study?
Well, in Denmark and in the Scandinavian countries, when we started the digital journey, it was typically the online editorial team that did the online news.
Analyze the data.
They analyzed the data, they produced the content for the internet, they chased the clicks, and they got likes on Facebook and etc. But now when the big groups have changed their strategy to a wholehearted digital subscription strategy, you see that digital moves into the core of the editorial the core of the editorial team and the newsroom, and you close down like this incubator department working with digital. So most of the Nordic newspapers do not have chief digital officers or a digital editor. Everybody has to do digital, and they have a one line of command, and not two parallels as we had in the first 5 or 10 years.
Okay.
So I think that looking from 10,000 feet down on the industry, I think that you see chief editors aging out, being replaced by new people who come in with a new spirit and who may want to try out a couple of things. They are very considerate of the legacy that they are taking over, but I see that every time when new people come on board, especially people who have been on the digital side of the business or have seen examples that could work there, I see that the whole spirit starts to change. So there's a cultural shift that influences this.
Okay, so we really don't see you. Yeah, there?
Yeah, right here.
Can you present yourselves first,
so
please?
Philippe Hertzberg, I'm in the back here. I don't know if you see me right here.
Yeah, we see you. There you are.
I'm an independent consultant.
Sorry.
Thanks a lot for your inspiring performances. Being here, they were music to my ears. Thanks a lot also for that mango model. I love it. I do believe about the choice, giving the choice. So I actually have two questions about giving the choice as far as a model to the reader. My question is, when is too many choices? When are you offering too many choices? The other question relating to Stefan, when you were saying publishers, editors should understand what their audiences want, whether it's, and depending on the day and the hour, whether it's lifestyle or news or sports. Do you see models where you're giving the choice of saying, I only want sports or I only want lifestyle and I'm willing just to pay for that? A side little note, in France where I'm based, L'Équipe says, well, if you're a tennis fan, you can just subscribe and pay for Roland Garros or Wimbledon and so forth for every sport. So do you see that as a trend in the paying model by theme, by content theme?
If I ask this first, answer this first, yeah, in the Danish market, what we have seen, we've seen a lot of niche portals started by the big publishing companies, and especially in the business-to-business segment, we see that there is a huge or high willingness to pay for news concerning construction and building or IT or whatever. So we see this is possible, but I'm not sure if it's a good thing to do it with your overall brand or within your overall brand product offering. There we see, at least in the small markets, that if you start to slice your brand into too many packages, it just doesn't add up. And if you ask the journalist that has to do also the overall news website and the printed newspaper also to be very focused on their particular niche, it causes problems. So I would recommend that you build your niche portals outside of your core team.
Maybe just to take over that, I think that the slicing your brand, this is my personal opinion, I don't really believe this is a big problem because people are doing that right now anyway. So a part of your content lives on Facebook, a part of your content lives on other people's platforms already. So that's what I would consider slicing a brand, because if I know that your sports content lives in this aggregator's product, I would go to them and I would essentially harm you even more. But going back to the questions of the choices.
Short because
question of the choices, 3 to 4. We found that if you give people just 2, it's not working by far as well as it works if you give them 3 to 4 choices. If you give them 5, it doesn't work as well. So 3 to 4 seems to be the sweet spot, with something low friction and the most expensive product at the end. And what we've seen is you see a smile curve. People go for the first model and for the last one mostly, and almost no one is in the middle, interestingly.
Another one there? I don't know which one. Well.
Hi, Dimitris Malas from CNN Greece. First, Stefan, one quick one. From what I understand, you're saying that Apple News and all these kind of models won't work in small markets, right? More or less. That's what you said.
Apple News, yeah, at least if you crack the numbers, you really need a substantial number of subscribers via Apple News in order to make up for what you can do yourself with the 2 to 5% of your most loyal readers.
So it will work in larger markets. And a second one question has to do, what about, how do you see that a model that a news publisher will have its content on an aggregator that provides a lot of services, meaning that like a telco, for example, that can offer music service, digital TV service, movie service, online storage, online gaming. That's a model that you both think could work?
Just briefly, I would say it undermines your own product offering if people can get it as a low-cost add to another product. It undermines your brand and your value proposition.
Okay, let's keep to one question per person, please.
Hi, Faisal Abbas from Arab News. I agree with the comment earlier, and I'd like to say I'll never look at mangoes the same way, thanks to you. But I want to roll back the conversation, actually. You're starting with the assumption that publishers need to charge for content. If you look at the social impact of that, that will only mean that we are paving the way for fake news producers, because they can offer their service for free. Essentially, from an editor or from a publisher's point of view, I think we should be focusing our efforts on collectively bargaining better with Google, with Facebook, with Twitter, to get better cuts from the revenue they're making out of our content, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on this.
We had that question. We just didn't have time to. Just a quick
I'm probably rather not the perfect person to answer that, because I believe that publishers are not really making use of the tools that Google and others offer right now. So there's a bunch of emotion that's sweeping up and down there, but if publishers were to employ the tools that are already available and ready to go, I think they could benefit a lot from the leverage that companies like Google offer. I believe that Google still cares most about the open internet, to keep that healthy and to provide tools to monetize that content. So that's what I believe.
Okay. So thank you very much for being here. I hope we did some of the questions, not all. I hope at least these questions will make you think about this in the next few days. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.